Just say the word, traders await cues on the next move in Syria. In today's cover story, why Americans still struggle to achieve the Dr. Martin Luther King dream. Plus, fast food workers across the nation are fed up. And Project Yellow Light, why it's becoming harder to get backing for a Hollywood hit. First Business starts now.
You're watching First Business. Financial news, analysis, and today's investment ideas.
Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, August 29th. I'm Angela Miles. In today's First Look, the stressed stock market. Traders are on edge as global tensions rise in Syria. Yesterday, the major indices all rallied as investors pumped money into oil stocks. Gold lost $4. Oil futures closed above $109 per barrel. The Federal Reserve offers new rules to avoid another housing market meltdown, including lenders having to hold more money to cover risky loans. And guess what? Shares of the jeans maker Guess had a huge breakout. The stock rallied more than 18% last night on heavy volume after delivering a strong earnings forecast. Ben Lichtenstein at TradersAudio.com joins us now. And Ben, good morning. Will we continue to feel this Syria effect in the market today?
Well, I think so. If you look at yesterday's activity, the market tried to get a little bit of a bid going throughout the day session trade, but then right around that middle of the day, 1:30 Central Time roughly, we started to sell off a little bit, unable to get into new low prints. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't that weak, but really just unable to hold the rally, if you will. And for the most part, what I've been noticing in terms of this downside activity that we've been seeing off that 1700 level in the S&Ps is just very little rejection of these lower levels. What we had been seeing on that slow, steady grind higher was every little bit of a retracement, every pullback was met with strong buy-side activity, and we're just not really seeing that right now. I think that's the fear factor at play.
What about oil? Where are the highs here?
Talk about fear factor at play. 112 yesterday in the overnight leading into yesterday morning's trade. Didn't quite get up there during the day session trade yesterday, but certainly the 110 levels, scary as it is. At this point, though, it's anyone's guess how far, how high this market could go. The market's basically vertical to the upside, which means it's seeking value. Any statement, any comments at the wrong time from the right person could send that market screaming higher. Obviously, geopolitical concerns at play there.
Traders love to buy on the rumor. What would you buy?
Well, I actually think that as long as this market holds up above that 1600 level, it's still a buy. Until we get some sort of word that we're seeing some significant tapering, we're seeing the lack of QE activity, I think that the market's still bid, and I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the bulls.
Thanks, Ben.
My pleasure.
In 50 years since the Civil Rights Movement's March on Washington, economic equality is still elusive by many measures since Martin Luther King spoke of the dream. Our cover story looks at milestones made, but with many more yet ahead.
Because they marched, doors of opportunity and education swung open so their daughters and sons could finally imagine a life for themselves beyond washing somebody else's laundry or shining somebody else's shoes.
50 years after Martin Luther King Jr. evoked the dream, this image brought it rushing back.
Because they marched, city councils changed and state legislatures changed and Congress changed and yes, eventually the White House changed.
It's hard to believe. I wish my grandfather would have been alive to see it.
But decades after the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, the event's full name, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, when 42% of blacks lived in poverty, economic equality has been elusive, even by the most recent measures. Black unemployment is 12.6%. For whites, it's 6.6%. Since 2009, black income has dropped 10.9%. White income has dropped 3.6%. The gap in household income hasn't changed in 50 years, and recently it's become harder for black entrepreneurs to get started.
Access to capital, I think, is a huge issue for people, but I think education in many of our communities is also an issue.
The nation's 44.5 million blacks comprise 14.2% of its population, but 8.9% of college graduates and 8.2% of corporate managers.
With the decline in manufacturing jobs and other jobs that have paid livable salaries, if you don't have an education, things have gotten worse.
Casey says research shows the gap between haves and have-nots within the black community has widened. While black entrepreneurs, prime source of collateral for business loans, their homes, have lost value.
Home values have declined a lot, and specifically in African American neighborhoods. So if your home is underwater, that will significantly limit your ability to borrow money.
African Americans' net worth is largely tied to their home values, whereas we look at white America, they're more diversified.
Despite peaks and valleys in the economic cycle since the 1960s, the gaps are basically the same. One notable gain, however, instead of 42% of blacks living in poverty 50 years ago, it's now 28%. For whites, a little less than 10%.
On the heels of the anniversary of Dr. King's speech on equality, Merrill Lynch is agreeing to pay to settle a lawsuit with black brokers. The lawsuit accused the brokerage of steering black employees into clerical positions while also diverting wealthy accounts to white brokers. The lawsuit was filed on the behalf of 700 black brokers who worked for Merrill Lynch back in 2005. The New York Times says Merrill will pay $160 million to settle the racial bias case.
Fast food workers are hungry for better wages. A nationwide strike among food industry workers that started on the East Coast is expected to spread to the South and to the West Coast today. It's part of the growing Fight for 15 movement. Workers are calling on corporations to pay a living wage of $15 an hour. Currently, the national minimum wage is $7.25. The strike is expected to take place in 35 cities across the country.
A full disclosure is out on salaries of officials at the Federal Reserve. Outgoing Chairman Ben Bernanke ranks low on the list with assets around $1.5 million. Vice Chair Janet Yellen, who's rumored to be under consideration to head the Fed, holds assets worth about $3.8 million, including a stamp collection possibly valued up to $50,000. The other front runner for the job, Lawrence Summers, has as much as $24 million.
JP Morgan may soon be slammed with more penalties. Regulators are preparing to unload a slew of fines against the bank, some dating back to the bank's behavior with consumers during the recession. Reports say the bank sold unnecessary financial products against identity theft and wrongly collected overdue bills from customers. New York Times says regulators will unveil the actions against JPM sometime next month. The bank declined comment.
Several Hooters employees in Florida are in hot water for allegedly attempting to get a slice of the BP settlement. The U.S. attorney there says they inflated their incomes to make it look like they lost significant amounts of money during the 2010 oil spill. Meantime, a federal judge is rejecting BP's latest request to suspend settlement payments. The oil giant maintains the claims process is filled with fraud.
The tables have turned in the manufacturing sector. Boston Consulting Group finds the U.S. is becoming a hotspot for cheap manufacturing. Costs in Germany, Japan, France, and Italy are predicted to rise by as much as 18% within the next 2 years, while lower labor costs in the U.S. are attracting foreign buyers.
The military situation in Syria has consumers fearing the worst for gas prices. Oil futures reached a 2-year high this week, climbing above $112 per barrel. However, consumers can breathe easy that gas prices are actually lower heading into the Labor Day holiday. Gas Buddy says prices average $3.58 a gallon, down 7 cents from last month. Demand for oil is also sliding.
What's interesting, overall demand for refined products like gasoline or aviation fuel is down about 2 million barrels a day over the last few years over where we had been. But and our supply is heading up. Our refiners are producing record amounts of fuel. We're a net exporter of refined petroleum product.
That was Rayola Dewar of the American Petroleum Institute. She says less demand could ultimately stabilize prices for motorists as oil producers are forced to compete.
Allstate Insurance is counting car crashes. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, ranks as the safest city for drivers. The average driver goes nearly 14 years between car collisions, about the same as in Boise, Idaho. Two cities with the most accidents, Baltimore and Washington, D.C., which falls to the bottom of the list, with drivers having fender benders or worse almost every 5 years.
A startling hindsight revelation is coming from overseas. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says Greece should never have been allowed to join the Eurozone. Merkel was speaking to a crowd of German voters when she proclaimed the debt crisis in Greece has been brewing for many years. And then she blamed her predecessor for letting Greece use the euro currency. The election in Germany is set for September 22nd.
Options trading in Leap Wireless is reportedly under review. USA Today reports that the Chicago Board Options Exchange, along with regulators, are checking into an unusually large number of call options contracts that traded just hours before AT&T disclosed that it was paying $14 billion to take over Leap Wireless. Leap stock doubled on the takeover news, making those call contracts extremely profitable.
There's a guilty plea connected to the George Zimmerman case. George Zimmerman's wife is pleading guilty to perjury. Her husband was acquitted in the killing of Trayvon Martin, who was shot by Zimmerman as he walked through a gated community. Shelley Zimmerman admitted in court yesterday she lied in her husband's bond hearing that the couple had little money. Prosecutors uncovered the Zimmermans had more than $100,000 from internet donations.
Detroit will retain access to its casino cash. The judge ruled this week that the city may continue to hold on to its gambling tax revenue. Detroit's bond insurer had attempted to gain access to the money, arguing that the taxes are considered collateral for other debts. However, a judge says that the revenues are protected by federal law and cannot be frozen. Currently, the city rakes in $180 million a year in taxes from its 3 casinos.
Groupon is buying a warehouse, and it's viewed as a competitive step toward Amazon. The Wall Street Journal reports Groupon is building a network of warehouses to store items to sell similar to Amazon, but there will be a revolving selection of goods similar to Costco or Sam's. Groupon's core business is selling daily coupons on the internet. Groupon shares have trended higher this summer under new management.
Groupon is among several companies doing a CEO shuffle this year. A new study shows nearly 40% of the top paid CEOs in the U.S. during the last 20 years wound up being fired, fined, or bailed out by the government. Among the names on the top 25 list, Ken Lay, whose company Enron collapsed from accounting fraud in 2001, and Dick Gould, who ran Lehman Brothers, which went down in the 2008 financial crisis.
Here's the economic calendar for today. It's initial and continuing unemployment claims, GDP's second estimate, and natural gas inventories. On the earnings calendar, Campbell Soup, 1-800-Flowers, Salesforce.com, Krispy Kreme, and Shoe Carnival. Still to come, why funding for films is presenting new challenges in Hollywood. Plus, a low-profile stock that traders are watching today and preparing for the worst. Tips on planning for natural disasters. Bill Mahler is up with that next.
In the 1950s, Americans worried about and they planned for possible nuclear holocaust. Well, that age of fear is past, but we have global terrorism now. There's a lot of chaos in the world. Of course, all those natural disasters. And it's easy to think, well, how should I prepare myself and my family for disaster? Anthony Kovic wrote the book. It's called Emergency Prepping, Simple Disaster Preparedness for the Modern Family. Anthony, how do I know what it is exactly I'm preparing my family to protect itself against?
You want to protect yourself from the basics of disasters. Storms that come in, power outages, blackouts, things that will destroy your food supply, especially if it's in the freezer for a couple of days or a week.
Now, people hear conversations like this, and they probably say, I don't have to prepare. The trucks are always going to be running, delivering food. I'm pretty content. And they probably don't take the kinds of steps that you recommend.
That is true. We live in a great country where our systems and distribution networks always are working on time and working well. So we haven't been used to that kind of issues.
All right, so what are the first steps? What is it should I buy and have on hand in the home?
Canned goods like soups are the best thing. Dry foods like beef jerkies, power bars, stuff that have a great shelf life.
So you don't need to have elaborate kind of preparedness. These sound like very simple, inexpensive steps that a family could take.
Very simple, very inexpensive. Most people live in cities, high rises. You cannot bring generators and stuff like that in high rises.
Where do you keep all of this? Just in the standard family pantry?
Standard family pantry. You get a couple of bins, you put them underneath your bed. You have a good 2 weeks supply ready to roll, a bug up pack so you can bail out if you have to leave town, and you're good to go.
Yeah, I know a lot of companies actually sell these kinds of things. I've seen it advertised at Costco, in fact.
That is true. A lot of companies have gotten in on the emergency prepping business. Some of the companies have long shelf life products, 10, 20, 25 years I've seen them. But, you know, I don't know if you want to eat something that's been around for 20 years.
Well, taste maybe isn't the top priority when you're really facing a disaster. Okay, Anthony Kovic, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Bill, environmental concerns are on the rise in Japan. Japan's government will take over cleanup efforts following a toxic water leak in a Japanese power plant. The Fukushima plant was hit by the 2011 tsunami. Radioactive exposure levels within the plant and among staff have increased since this past July when the leak began. The problem was not actually discovered until mid-August, however.
Still to come, are we living in the age of box office bombs? Find out at Movies and Money. And later on, the tech stock that traders love but is not so popular with average investors. We'll be right back. The Butler carried the box office for the second weekend in a row. Our movie guy is here to tell us if it's due for a three-peat. Happy to have you back on the show. Will it happen again?
It very well could. It doesn't have a whole lot of competition this weekend unless the teenage girls flock the theaters for the One Direction movie. I think The Butler will score a third straight weekend.
We'll talk about that in just a minute, but here are the numbers in the box office over the weekend. The Butler at $16.5 million. Now, these numbers are not terrifically high, but is The Butler making its money back?
Oh, absolutely. No, The Butler is most definitely a hit, and it was a very small budgeted film, with 41 producers all chipping in 6 pennies or whatever they did. The Butler is definitely going to make its money back, and it's a word-of-mouth hit, so this film is going to keep going and going for a few more weeks.
Well, that's what I'm hearing. The demographic is growing on this one. Also on the list were The Millers, the Jennifer Aniston film.
Another big hit.
The Mortal Instruments and The World's End and Planes coming in around $8 million. So coming up this weekend, you already gave us a little bit of a tip-off here.
Yeah.
We have Closed Circuit, Getaway, and One Direction. This Is Us. Let's start with Closed Circuit.
Yeah, it's not getting a very big release from Focus Features, who also they should have released The World's End in more theaters last week to get a bigger bump, but you're not going to see much from Closed Circuit this weekend.
And Getaway, which you screened.
I did screen it. It's a really ridiculous movie. Should just be called Shifting the Movie, because that's pretty much all the movie entails. It's probably going to do maybe $10, $11 million over the 4 days. You're not going to see a lot of big money this weekend.
That's horrible. And then One Direction, again, this is a concert movie.
Yeah, and this could go either way. I mean, I don't know. If this movie was released maybe a year and a half ago, maybe it would have done more. I mean, we saw the Justin Bieber movie and the Miley Cyrus movie back when she wore clothes that did very well. But the last couple, not the One Direction, but the Jonas Brothers movie and the Katy Perry movie didn't do that well. So this is kind of a mixed bag. We'll see how it does.
Behind the scenes, you have a couple of big Hollywood heavy hitters, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, saying that the film industry is in for an implosion.
What Lucas and Spielberg were getting at earlier this summer when they made these statements was the idea that these big budgets that were keep coming out of Hollywood, that the more money they keep pouring into these movies, if they don't make their money back, you're going to see Hollywood sort of implode. And we had that month period where you had White House Down and Lone Ranger and R.I.P.D. and Turbo and Pacific Rim, and they were all sort of failing a little bit, and that's what they were sort of looking at. But we had 23 movies this year that have budgeted over $100 million. 15 of them can be considered successes. So, which way are we going here?
But there's a lot of money being spent on flops.
Absolutely. I mean, Lone Ranger was a huge flop, White House Down. But, 15 out of 23, if you're doing the math, that's not too bad for a summer that's going to be, it's the biggest summer on record. We're looking at $4.4 billion this summer in the midst of all these flops. So it's a weird summer for sure.
Eric, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Still ahead, the software stock that's captured the focus of traders. Chart Talk is next. Matt Kavanaugh, CMZ Trading, joins us now to talk about a software stock that is oh so popular with traders. Good morning.
Good morning.
The company is Salesforce.com. It's not as large as Microsoft, but it tends to be a mover, and it's very popular, as I just mentioned, with traders. Why is that?
Well, I think it's a good bellwether for the software industry, and it's one that we like to look at. This is a stock that was below $10 back in 2009 and is now a mid-40 stock. So really a big player in the cloud market, a big player for the CRM software, and something that we're definitely going to be watching here.
Earnings are out tonight. The options market is predicting a major move could be ahead. Would you be a buyer of this stock now, or would you wait until later?
Well, I think that this stock is a really interesting thing to watch because the expectations over the quarter have really come down. The analysts have cut what they're looking for the full year by a third. So as a result, the stock is kind of sit. It's attracted a lot of short sellers, and really it's sitting here just waiting for the information. So I think the big key for Salesforce is going to be how are their acquisitions that they've done moving together with the company? Can they increase their margins anymore? And what kind of positive news can they say going forward? So I think at least in the short term, that it's possible that this stock could get a pop if they say anything positive at all.
From what you're telling us, if the news is positive, the short sellers could be squeezed into buying more shares, and that could be a good ride for investors. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is a really expensive stock. It's trading about 80 times earnings, one where revenue growth in the mid-20s isn't even that exciting because people expect so much more. But with expectations really coming down and people not thinking too much is going to happen, and short sellers saying, hey, you know, let's hope we don't have to cover here, maybe something good will happen.
Thanks for coming on the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today. Coming up on the show tomorrow, it's Traders Unplugged, and don't miss the Singing Nuns, how these sisters flew to the top of the music charts and are making it big time in the recording business. From all of us at First Business, have a great Thursday.